Andy, you sound great, man.
Great
to see you. Everyone, this is Andy Powers. We're at the Taylor factory in El Cajon, California. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. And we've just had a factory tour here, and I want to talk to you a little about the craftsmanship that goes into making the incredible instruments that Taylor makes.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that really impressed me is a Taylor, of course, is well known for high tech and the approach that you guys use to making very uniform and precise, in a good way, instruments that they're consistent, right?
Yeah.
But what amazed me going through the factory is how much handwork is going into these instruments and the skilled craftspeople that you have making them.
Yeah, you know, the way we've always worked as guitar makers is we want to use the process, the tool, the method that builds the best guitar.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, that means building a machine to do something consistently, like bending sides.
Mm-hmm.
We have now fully automated side bending machines that we use to form the rim of this guitar. That enables us to build a very accurate, precisely shaped guitar.
Right.
For our neck making process, we're using a lot of CNC controlled machinery to make individual cuts so that every single neck turns out with the flexing characteristic, the amount of relief, the fretwork, all of those details have to be very precise. Because if I accidentally built a good one, that means I could accidentally build a bad one.
Right.
So I don't want any of that accidental customization to happen.
Right.
I want the neck that we intend to build. It's got to be a good one every single time. So we build a lot of high precision tooling and a lot of automated technology to help us get those results.
Right.
Some processes, those don't automate well. So certain things, they're a lot better to teach somebody how to do those. Say like putting the binding or sanding a guitar. Okay, sanding a guitar is simple in some ways and unbelievably difficult in others. Because if you put a guitar in front of somebody, maybe just the body, and hand them a sander, they're probably going to ruin it.
Right.
They're going to sand a hole right through the top. They're going to alter the top thickness, which totally ruins the voicing. All kinds of things where I can't automate it that very well. So what works better is to teach a method and teach a process for building that consistently.
Right.
So what we do here in our factory, as well as our factory in Tecate, is we're using a mix of very old world craftsmanship, very hands-on, like your own two hands kind of workmanship.
Right.
As well as very high-tech modern robotics and automation. It's a mix of all of the processes and the methods that enable us to get a consistently good guitar.
Right. Right. Yeah, some things really stood out to me in the course of the tour. There were so many amazing craftspeople, but you mentioned the binding process, and of course the standard binding is impressive enough, but when you talk about the beveled edges, the 800, 900s, I was blown away watching the craftsman working on that. And he was telling me he does like 5 a day is all he can do, or not even that many.
Yeah, which is 5 a day is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Like there's some of these guitars, like one of our presentation series models, that's an incredibly difficult guitar to build because of all of the elaborate inlay and edge trim. You're only the very handful of our craftsmen who are the very best at what they do work on those, and that is something that's going to take you a long time. You're not doing 5 a day of those. There's no possible way.
Right.
You know, it's some of those different models, they are difficult.
It is amazing. Yeah, very labor intensive, and even the rosettes around the sound holes and installing those kind of things. I mean, there's a lot of precision that's required, but it's all done by hand. It's
say like installing this inlaid rosette. Yeah, there's a bunch of different designs that we use, and they're sized specifically to models and sound hole sizes and whatnot. But there's no way to automate that we know of yet. So we're always working on better and better methods, more efficient, more consistent, safer methods to build these instruments. In the meantime, we do the very best we can.
Right.
And use whatever method gives us the best, highest result.
The other aspect that stood out to me was the people who were sorting the tops and the sides. and matching them, not just for color, but for flexibility for the different ranges of
Oh,
of instruments
absolutely.
and things. I mean, there's a lot of skill required there.
Yep, and those there's a couple of folks who do our wood matching, and you want, in that case, because there are so many different variables and characteristics that you're looking for and grading for, when you become attuned to them, they're plain as day to see. But you have to be in the right environment with the right skill, the right experience. And so those areas, it's a handful of people who do it. They've been doing it for literally decades. They have certain lighting requirements so that you can see two pieces of wood in exactly the same light.
Right.
You have kind of the same spot that you do this in so that you can have a consistent result with yourself.
Right, right. We were looking at the process of the wood coming in and kind of acclimating, which is actually done here in San Diego because of the pretty consistent humidity and temperatures and things. Then the humidity has changed and it's kind of brought back again. Talk a little bit about what that does to a guitar and what happens with the wood as you're...
Well, absolutely. We build in a climate-controlled environment. That environment here in the factory is 47% relative humidity at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the reason we choose that is it's like right in the very middle of what kind of weather conditions you could expect a guitar to live in. It's that real average point. Is what happens is a piece of wood will expand as it goes into a wet climate. So if we took a piece of wood, you cut it to a size. If you took it into a high humidity environment, the wood is going to start to equalize into its surroundings. It'll absorb moisture. When it does that, it'll try to grow. It physically will get larger.
Right.
And then if you took that same piece of wood and you took it into a real dry environment, let's say you live in the desert somewhere where there's almost no humidity, that piece of wood is going to lose moisture as it looks for equilibrium in its environment, and it'll get too small. Well, with a guitar, that's really tricky because we have this kind of delicate box that has wood grain going in a lot of different directions, and a piece of wood won't shrink or expand evenly in every direction. I mean, a piece of metal will as it heats up or cools down, but a piece of wood will not. It'll shrink very little and grow very little from roots to leaves. That direction doesn't change hardly at all, but side to side, kind of from the middle of the tree out to the bark, that'll change quite a lot.
Right.
And so when you have a piece of wood that has these different growth characteristics, and you put them all together, you need to try and keep the finished guitar in that median environment so it has the best chance of maintaining its integrity.
Right, right. We were talking and watching the final assembly is also very interesting to me because with the neck joint that Taylor uses, you guys have a lot of flexibility for really optimizing the guitar yet still making it consistent. So you don't get one that plays great and one that doesn't play so great.
I can't have that.
Right. But those guys are very skilled as well.
Absolutely.
At doing that setup, and we were talking about how that affects all that. Talk a little bit about that neck joint, how that plays into the way the guitar is.
So our Taylor neck system is unique in that it's a bolted together system. I say bolts, and it sounds pretty crude, but the reality is it's machined with ultra high tolerance, and then we have these ultra high tolerance spacers between the neck itself and the body itself. Now those spacers have ever so minutely different amounts of angle machined into them, so that as we go to marry this neck to the body, we can put those two spacers in and they work as a system. So you can get exactly the right relationship between this neck angle and the body that you need.
Right.
And by exact, I mean within a few thousandths of an inch. To put that in perspective, an ordinary sheet of paper, like a piece of typing paper, that's 3/1000ths of an inch thick. That's the increment that we use for our height adjustment and angle adjustment.
Wow.
So you're building an ultra accurate instrument 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now. Let's say this guitar has weathered, it's aged, the wood's stretched in a little. Maybe that geometry has changed a little. So you need a neck reset. In the past, that would mean a lot of invasive surgery. You get a cappuccino maker where you're steaming this neck off and trying to undo glued-in wood joints and whatnot.
Right.
Man, it's a traumatic operation for a guitar.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of one of these guitars, using this Taylor neck, in the span of about 10 minutes, you can take out the fasteners, the holding fasteners. You remove the neck from the body, find out what spacers you have in there. Maybe you choose the next one over. It has a slightly different amount of angle machined into it. Put a new set of spacers in, reattach the neck to the body. You're good for another 30 years.
Right. Right. Very different from having to, like you say, unglue the neck and whatever else is required to do that. And also, you don't have to mess with different height bridge saddles and moving the bridge around to compensate for the way that the neck and everything is changing.
Exactly. Because saddle height and bridge height really matter a great deal for determining the voicing of that guitar. You know, a lower angle has a little different string pull and a different string load at the top than, say, if the neck was tilted back a long ways. All of those will change the voicing and the sound of the guitar, not to mention the string response, the feel.
Right.
Well, I want that to be a controllable thing, because there are some ideal spots for that. So having this ability to ever so minutely dial in the neck angle exactly where we want it allows us to make a really controlled, carefully machined height for the saddle. It affects the balance of the pickup, the responsiveness out of a pickup, the responsiveness of the guitar itself.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Speaking of the pickup, we were checking out the pickup that you guys use, and it's a very different assembly. I think people think of just the strip underneath the bridge saddle. That's not what's going on there anymore, is it?
No, we're using a system we call the Expression System 2. Now, it's a piezo-based system, like a lot of the familiar under-saddle transducer pickups, but rather than under the saddle, where it's being squashed by about 70 pounds of downward string pressure, we put this piezo crystal on a controlled, adjustable system in a little housing behind the saddle. Right there, we can control the preload that's on the piezo crystals themselves. So we have a really highly dynamic range coming through that pickup system. As well, it captures a lot more of the natural three-dimensional motion of the guitar top itself.
Right, right. Obviously, it works very well.
Works out pretty well.
That quack that you expect from that type of a pickup isn't really there with that system. So,
no, it's not there in the same way. Like I mentioned, we usually have something like 70-ish pounds of downward string tension or pressure on an undersaddle pickup, depending on string break angle, size of strings, and whatnot. But what we preload this thing to is in the manner of inch ounces. It's just a tiny, tiny little bit of pressure, because that's where the piezo crystal has its best chance for dynamic range.
Nice, nice.
Offers a lot more naturalness in the response.
Right, right, right. Clearly it works. So another area that fascinated me was there actually are several different thickness finishes and different polishes and things that you do on the instruments. Tell us about that. Tell us how you choose a finish that goes on a particular guitar.
Okay. Well, a finish for a guitar has a couple of purposes. One of them, you have to finish it so that it'll stay protected. You sweat all over this thing, it's going to get banged around, it gets scratched, you need to protect that thing.
Right.
Second part is you have to protect it from the environmental change. The inside of the guitar is left unfinished, but the outside is finished, so it helps slow down the effects of temperature and humidity. The most overlooked part of a finish is you're controlling the dampening factor of the piece of wood itself. Now, we often think of dampening and immediately say, well, that's not what I want. I want something that's totally undampening or undamped. That's not true at all, because what you're after is a musical instrument. And if you don't dampen some of the inharmonic sound that thing would make otherwise, the result is terrible. So if you've ever tried playing a guitar, an acoustic instrument that has no finish on it, it's horrible.
Yeah.
It's not pleasant at all, because you're hearing all kinds of weird inharmonic resonances and nasty non-musical stuff mixed in there.
Right.
So what we do is we devise these finishes, and their thickness, their density, their hardness values based on what that guitar needs. So certain instruments like our 800 series or our 900 series, we use a very, very thin, what we call a 3.5 mil finish. It's 3.5 thousandths thick, give or take. A couple of give or take about 1/10 of a thousandth either way, which is not much.
Right.
But it's a very controlled coating to control and finish the voicing of that guitar. This silent satin finish is a little thicker than that. It's about 4.5 thousandths, give or take a couple of tenths.
Right.
Because that's the dampening factor that we liked for this guitar.
It's a lot of thought.
Yeah.
It's not just spray some
No,
aerosol can on the.
No, not at all.
Right. Yeah. It was
No,
very.
the finishing is part of building the guitar.
So the other thing that impressed me touring the factory is something that we're also big proponents of at Sweetwater, and that's that everything is very green here. And in particular, I was very impressed with, when you're cutting pieces of wood, there are going to be little pieces left over, and there's lots of sawdust and shavings and things. And what do you do with all those? And actually, what do you do with all those? And what happens to all of that material?
Okay, well, part of what we want to do is we want to build instruments that serve a musician. But we want to do that so that it doesn't harm our forests, people cutting the wood, or anything else in the meantime. So in a lot of ways, we're working hard proactively to replant forests, to harvest in sustainable ways, to leave our forests in better condition than the way we found them. But that mentality exists all the way through constructing the guitar. We want to cut the materials and use them in the most efficient manner and reuse the scraps for smaller pieces. You don't want to throw this stuff away. It's way too precious. I mean, in a way, you could say wood doesn't just grow on trees. You have to use it in the ways that you can to make good, efficient usage. So something like the way we build our neck has a lot less waste than a traditional mahogany neck would, where you take a big old chunk of mahogany, you cut away everything that isn't a guitar neck. Well, no, we actually fabricate this neck with some complex joinery so that we don't have to throw away a big chunk of that piece of mahogany. Even all the way down to the little tiny bits that are left over, the little parts that weren't quite a guitar, the sawdust, if you will. All the sawdust we even mulch and goes to local nurseries.
Nice.
So that we can repurpose even the sawdust that we swept off the floor.
Right.
But every little bit is accounted for and used to make maximum value out of that resource.
Right. I even saw where in the finishing room, the buffing compound is collected by vacuums and reused as buffing compound again.
Yeah,
It's just
still good material.
Right.
You just got to reformulate it.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. And it's so impressive to tour the factory and see that marriage of technology and responsibility and craftsmanship and artisanship that goes into making these instruments. And it's part of why they're such phenomenal instruments when they're finished. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting us here today. We really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure.
Always great to see you.
Likewise.
Thank you. And thank you for joining me in El Cajon, California. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater, coming to you from the Taylor Factory.